All right, everybody, welcome. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shannon Smith, and I'm joined here by Julius, our CTO and co-founder at MergeBase, and Jim Manico, who's one of our advisors and CEO at Manicode, which does application and security training. Hey, Jim, how's it going?
Doing fantastic. How you doing?
Great, amazing green screen you got going on there. It looks like you're sitting in front of Mount Shasta or something.
Yeah, so honestly, this is live. This is not a background. I'm here on vacation.
Oh, we don't believe you.
I'm up in Mount Shasta. This is real. This is a real hot tub. This is not a background.
You're using that CGI stuff. That green screen's incredible.
That's actually Mount Shasta right there. Black butt. And I'm up in Mount Shasta, but I figure I'm on vacation. I got a hot tub.
Yeah.
But I can't let a hot tub or vacation get in the way of informing the world about third-party library supply chain runtime protection. So I'm happy to be here with you, Shannon.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking time out of your vacation.
Absolutely.
This is going to be a nice, quick mini session as we're doing it and not taking too much of people's time. So hopefully you'll enjoy yourself there and the view and the session. Okay, so today's topic. Last time we talked just about runtime protection kind of in general, did a little introduction. I'm going to go through the slide deck again today just for a couple of minutes, but our topic today is about application hardening, basically using runtime monitoring and protection from MergeBase in order to reduce your attack surface and proactively, before you're attacked and before there's CVEs, and harden your applications and lock down all the unneeded third-party components as needed. Okay, so just real quick, in case you missed our first session, supply chain security is not going away. In fact, it's under massive attack and it's been escalating. Prior to 2020, you hadn't heard about it all that much, but about 2016, it started coming onto the radar and then it spiked up pretty quickly. Since then, it spiked up much more quickly, right? In 2021, we saw a 650% increase in software supply chain attacks. Gartner's predicting this will continue increasing at least 100% a year for the next few years. The majority of CIOs and CISOs know that they're vulnerable to these attacks and are looking for, solutions. The primary solution nowadays is just software composition analysis, which is MergeBase's core business and platform. But how did this problem come about, right? Well, the way it came about was, 10 plus years ago, there was like less than 50,000 libraries and repositories out there in GitHub.
And Shannon, if I could add just real quick,
please.
Why do people build third-party libraries in the first place? I think this is a really important question. The reason that people build third-party libraries is there's a real complicated problem in computer programming that they don't want to have to keep rebuilding. So they build a third-party library. The point I'm trying to make is, just to add to this slide, third-party libraries, by their nature, are encapsulating complexity. So when we look at all these third-party libraries that we depend upon, they're hard to scan. They're hard to review. They're mammothly complicated, especially the frameworks like the Spring and Struts and all that. So I think the complexity of libraries, this slide really illustrates some of the key problems. I just want to put it out there. The problems are even more than this. They're hard to review. They're hard to analyze, and they're moving constantly and changing. And yet we depend on them at an epic level more than we should, I dare say. So this is really a big problem, Shannon.
Yeah, and you can see the number from 46,000 to 28 million, right? We're talking about a 61,000% increase in the last decade or so.
Absolutely.
Now you got millions of libraries, hundreds of versions of each library, multiple distribution paths. You got all kinds of problems in here like poisoning, and I mean the list of problems goes on and on. But the majority of the problems actually center around Java, which is why with runtime protection, we released Java runtime protection first, because they have more criticals than all the other combined. I've heard a stat that 90% of data breaches, start in one way or another with Java. You don't have to tell Equifax about this. They had a Java struts library that was popped, and they lost $5 billion in market cap in one day, and they never really recovered from that from a valuation point of view.
I think what's interesting about Equifax, Shannon, is that Equifax, they didn't even note the breach until many months later when they updated their data protection system. So they had this multi-million-dollar data protection system that wasn't updated, so it didn't even see the exfiltration. But months later, some engineer updated the cert and then they saw it. So that Equifax supply chain attack was blind to Equifax for months. That's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is about, people realize that, hey, I just bought this application, or hey, I'm building an application, and all the source code that we wrote, we've scanned and it's safe. Well, it turns out the majority of your source code that you wrote is usually 10 to 20% of the app. The third party or open source components are usually 80 to 90% of your application. And those vulnerabilities in those third party components are what we are focused on with software supply chain security.
And Shannon, the SCA industry is horrible in letting you know if you actually have a problem. If the function that is vulnerable is something you're actually using, most of the industry ignores that. They just say the library you're using is a problem, not like at the atomic level. So there's a huge problem. There's a huge amount of vulnerable code that we're actually deploying live. And we don't even really understand, even with some of the state-of-the-art competitors that we have, whether or not you're vulnerable or not. So it's just
and that's a great point, Jim, because that really is what differentiates MergeBase from all the other SCA companies out there. MergeBase is the only company that is giving you visibility into production and into ops with its runtime protection and runtime monitoring. So we're looking at what applications you're running in production and telling you what libraries and methods they have that could be vulnerable. And we're giving you ways to both monitor them and even block them, right? In case of, serious things like log4j or struts. And so really that's what we're talking about here today, is a unique capability, runtime protection specifically for Java. MergeBase has released this and is coming out with, as Julius will show us later, a one-click protection version of this, where people can literally just point it at an application, push a single button, and lock everything down that's not being used proactively, which is really what today's session is about, is talking about proactively hardening your stuff before there's a known vulnerability and blocking yourself from all the things you're not using and reducing your attack surface by 50 to maybe 80 or 90% even, with the click of a button at the end of the day with runtime protection.
To be fair, I'll be showing sort of the earlier version of that. It's not quite at one click. It's taking a few clicks. Though the one-click protection is under active development.
Right. Yeah.
It's coming.
But the whole idea that you can monitor it's basically, I always like to use the analogy, I just moved into the Biltmore estate. Hey, I inherited this estate. It's got 150 doors in it, a couple hundred windows. And after my wife and I are living there by ourselves for about 6 weeks, we realized, we use like 6 of those 150 doors, and we only use like 3 windows. So, hey, I got a novel idea. Why don't we lock all the 144 doors that we're not using, so that nobody can walk in randomly at any time of the day or night and violate our privacy, right? And so you think that's like such common sense, but we don't do that with our applications. We pull in these third-party components. We use 1 or 2 functions in a library, and all the other functions in that library we leave access to, and they could have a 0-day on them, or they could have a CVE on them tomorrow, and they're not protected. But why not lock them down if you're not using them? That's the basic premise of runtime protection. Okay, so let's talk about let's talk about this in some more detail here. I'm gonna go back to this just enter a screen here. So how long, Julius, first of all, I learned a new stat last week that I want to share with everyone, and this should have been on the first slide here, but when log4j was announced on December 9th, it basically, over 200,000 attacks were launched. According to Checkpoint Research, over 200,000 log4j attacks were launched within the first 24 hours of the CVE being reported. And within a week, there was 1.2 million attacks. And a lot of those some of those were actually coming from state-sponsored, people like China, et cetera. And so,
one more real quick.
Go
there
ahead.
was active exploitation in early January, way before the release, because that's how we found out that log4shell was an active problem. We saw that on Weibo. This is the Chinese version of Twitter. We saw a lot of the Chinese hackers actually talking about this exploit, and they began using it at an exponential fashion. There's a researcher, Free Wortley, who was on the series a couple months ago, who was tracking Twitter, saw the check-ins at the actual log4j project where they were trying to fix it.
Yeah.
And went live with it because it was under active exploitation. So the only point I'm trying to make is December 9th shows up and we saw an increase, a couple million attacks. There was already some nation state level attacking going on before that. So even before we know the 0 day is out there. So
Right.
think about that one for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the bottom, like our last session was on patching, how it takes time, to deploy it and everything else. But I mean, let's be realistic. Who can patch within 24 hours unless you are the software developer? And even if you do patch within 24 hours, you still have to deploy it and you have to test it and you have to, all this stuff, right?
What about DevOps? The DevOps world tells me, oh, Shannon, I got DevOps. I can just push stuff live quickly and I don't need runtime protection. What do you think about that? I've heard that from a few DevOpsians.
They can push it, but it's not QA'd yet. It's not out on all their servers and all their clouds, and it's not scaled out yet. And it could break something if they push it too fast.
High five.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and then the library itself that's under attack might not have been patched. You might not have any library to upgrade to.
Right.
Absolutely.
There's that too. Yeah. So last session we talked about, how patching can take time. Sometimes people never release patches for certain, deprecated softwares, and runtime protection is great for helping close that window faster. But in the case of, like major things like Log4j or struts, when those things get announced, I've now learned since our last session that, hundreds of thousands of attacks can happen in the first 24 hours, millions of attacks within the first week. I mean, patching is just not a realistic way to reduce your risk in those scenarios. Whereas runtime protection not only can help you literally close that window in minutes once you know about it, it can actually help you close that window before you know about it. And that's what we're really talking about today, is basically looking at your application, monitoring your application, monitoring how your application uses all the software libraries that you've brought into it and all the methods within those software libraries. And the ones that are never used, just use runtime protection to block them. And then you never, if a 0 day pops up tomorrow, you're not vulnerable to that because you've already locked your attacks. You've already reduced your attack surface, and you can't be attacked there anymore.
I also like the idea that runtime protection that I can enable immediately buys me time to analyze the library, to do the actual update, to slowly do QA and be more judicious about when I do release, because I probably want to update the library. I want to replace it or something. But I like runtime protection because, boom, within a minute, I got this dealt with. Yep. And now I can take my time to deal with it in a more robust fashion and stop myself from being attacked from these problems.
Yeah. I mean, instead of weeks or months, your vulnerability window is now minutes or, a day or two at the most, right?
And I think that's important, because what's important is not so much like how many vulnerabilities you have. That's just going to happen. I think what's important is your ability to reduce the exposure window. That's a much better way of measuring risk. You can't really measure risk statically, in my opinion. I need to see how the application lives over the course of many months. And if we both have 100 vulnerabilities in our app, Shannon, you and I both do, and my vulnerabilities are lasting for months, and your vulnerabilities are getting runtime protected in real time, even though we have the same vulnerability count over time, the actual risk of your organization is radically less than mine, even though we have the same vulnerability count. Yep. So that vulnerability count in a static point of time, that's not a good way to measure risk, and it never was.
That's a very good point. If I'm driving 100 miles an hour down the road on a little straight thing in a back road for 10 minutes and then I stop, that's not very risky. If I'm driving 100 miles an hour all the time, I'm through town, and then it starts getting real risky, right?
Do you actually drive 100 miles an hour? Are you one of those speed demons?
No.
My girlfriend.
Those are my younger years.
My girlfriend, she calls me whenever I'm driving fast. She's like, "Hey Mario, why don't you slow down a little bit?" That's my speedy name, is Mario.
Well, speaking of driving fast, let's let Julius take us through a quick drive-through of runtime protection. Show this interface. Show how easy it is to look at what you're running and click the block button. Basically.
Julius, how you doing, buddy? How you doing, Julius?
Oh,
I miss you.
Doing well. So here I'll show off the attack surface reduction, right? So what we've done here, these are all our SCA scans, but here at the very top we have a runtime protection as well. So one of our systems here has the runtime applied, and this system, it's preceded with very horrible, vulnerable libraries. But one thing is interesting about it is this system has been operating and running and doing its thing for, the last few days, few weeks here. And Runtime Protection is carefully keeping track of all the usages of these libraries. I can just sort by that, right? You can see that the Tomcat library is very important to this system's operation. Quickly scroll down, there's sort of this long tail that happens. So a lot of these libraries, they're hanging out, they're just getting called a little bit, right? Some of them haven't even been called at all since the application was started up. So these libraries here, all these zeros, these seem to be part of the startup routine, but they're not really used at all after the application is up and running. So I think of these libraries, all these zeros, as because what we're measuring here is,
look at like Tomcat file uploader, right? Oh, talk about a scary piece of code. You're actually doing a multi-part form upload being received on the server. That's not going to pick up, but the file upload library gets attached to other frameworks. So it's all over the place. Every framework in the Java ecosystem uses it.
And it looks like there's a 9.8 in there, right? So if that's not being used, are we able just to block that?
Yeah, sure. I can just hit that and
go ahead, Julius. I'm sorry, buddy.
Oh, no. We need this.
There we go.
That was 2 clicks.
It was 2 clicks. Yeah. Well, we're working on the one click.
I'm okay with 2 clicks. I like 2 clicks.
And but I just wanted to make a point here. Like I think of systems as having a lot of almost like the space shuttle. You know how it's got those engines, all those engines that get it up into orbit, right? When you're launching your system, a lot of libraries are used to get your system up into its running state. But then, a minute, 2 minutes later, these libraries are never used again, right? So you can block them, turn them off, because shrink your attack surface, shrink the amount of libraries present in your system. And then when I really go to the bottom here, now you see these libraries here, these are the unloaded ones. So not only, they're not even used during startup, like they're there in the class path, they're present, but we don't like, why do we
that's all attack surface that is totally needed.
It's totally useless. Yeah.
But if you had if a 0-day 10 came out on one of these tomorrow, they could come in through there, even though you're not using it effectively, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a common misconception in industry too. They're like, the library is not being used, so I'm not vulnerable. A lot of people seem to think that. And
so right now you just blocked all those unloaded libraries that you checked, right?
Yeah, that's
basically like the new one-click codename one-click protection feature that's coming out. It would do this for you automatically, right?
Yeah. You just click.
You could literally, you'll have just a wizard where you can just say, anything that's not being used, I want to block it.
You just click up here, and then go on.
What's really interesting about this, I think, is that there's a company called Castor, one of the original Java shops in the planet, right? And they built a little free tool that lets me point at a Java app and look at any third-party libraries I'm not using. And a couple of years ago, I used this against several of my projects, and it was like insane the number of libraries that I have set up that I just flat out don't use. And look at all the attacks recently from Log4j, struts, and Spring, and similar. They're often dynamic reflection-based vulnerabilities that lets me call other classes in the class path. So put this all together, and I have all these junk classes I'm not using in the class path, and there's some kind of reflection vulnerability. Now those libraries that I don't need for any reason can be used for exploitation. This is really a problem in the Java ecosystem, Julius.
Yeah, everyone. Oh, and I mean, in all the ecosystems, actually, software engineers, they oversubscribe to their dependencies because they believe there's no harm in that. Oh, let's just bring down everything, everything that everything needs.
I might need it later,
maybe.
But the hackers thinking the same thing. I might need it now.
Yeah,
This is what started in the 90s. I remember doing Java 1.0.2 in 98. Using 50 third-party libraries is that early in the Java ecosystem. This is how we were taught to develop.
Yeah. No, it's great to have everything with you, right? Until you want to start finding an attack path. Now you got so many more vectors to come in with. It's just a matter of time before you find one. So you got to reduce that attack surface, and that's what Runtime Protection does for you. Guys, we're at 20 minutes here. This has been really helpful and useful. I think We showed off, you know, how you can be proactive, how easy you can do it right from your hot tub. You know, I mean, it's not a hard thing to do. But God, it could make the difference between $5 million in market cap shaved off in the next 24 hours. If you know, so this is a big thing, and we're excited for people to be able to start trying this out and using it. So thank you guys for your time, and we'll now do some questions from the audience.
But we're here to continue the conversation. Go ahead, Shannon.
Let's oh, you already upgraded everybody. Great. Thank you guys for all attending. Yeah, we were going to try to play it off by wearing the same clothes, but Julius just ruined the surprise. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's wonderful to have you guys, especially the return visitors today. Thank you for coming. Jim may join us for Q&A if he can break out of his training session, but yeah, that's why we had to record it, because he was busy this morning. Yeah, so do we have any questions right now? You can chat questions or Q&A questions, or you can just take your mute off and ask questions if you have any questions about runtime protection, hardening your application, protecting it against 0 days, you know, what this means, why it's important. No stupid questions, so feel free to ask them.
Yeah, Shannon, it's Al.
Hey, Al.
How are you, man?
Good. Good to see you. Thanks for
and you as well. Quick question. Besides the fact that I'd really like a hot tub to ask it from, but how easy is it for customers to do a proof of concept on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's like we showed you today, you know, I mean, most of the features and functions that you're using here is something you can literally do in minutes or hours, right? So it depends on how wide the scope of the POC is going to be. I mean, if they want to use it in development for SCA, if they want to use it for SBOM, you know, if they want to use it for runtime protection, it's all one platform. So it installs pretty easily and fast. You know, most of the features, you know, to start integrating it into your SDLC and things like that, of course, that's going to take a little bit more effort to get it smoothly integrated and make sure, you know, whether you're using GitHub or GitLab and your repositories are linked in. We've tried to make it really easy to integrate this thing in, so it just becomes a seamless part of the whole process. You know, with runtime protection being the final result, looking into the ops side of the, you know, of the cycle. But
and then there is
for more technical answer, Julius. Please.
Oh well, there's always, and then there's for the runtime protection specifically, currently only available on Java or Java bytecode based platforms. So Gradle, Java. What are some of those other Java based languages? Kotlin, and there's a few others, but so there is that limitation as well. Al.
Okay, no, that's good to know. It's just that, you know, obviously nice to be able to offer it to potential customers and know what it's going to be. Something it's not going to take weeks for it to happen.
No, yeah. Our standard kind of POC timeline just for people is like 2 weeks, because they usually can get a pretty good handle on it within that time frame. You know, for more extensive POCs or larger customers, you know, we're happy to extend that if needed. You know, but yeah, within 2 weeks, normally people can get a pretty good handle on how this is going to work and the benefits. So it's not a huge time commitment from them, basically.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience today? We got another 5 minutes here.
I'm just sharing the runtime protection, the system that we have applied the runtime protection to here, just on our dashboard here, so you can still trucking along.
Yeah. So just to clarify, you know, the normal procedure, you know, for runtime protection is, you know, you normally start with runtime monitoring, and that way you can see these usage stats of every library, and then you can go into the individual libraries and look at the usage of the individual methods. And you can see if a method or a library is being used or not, or how often it's being used. And then once you've determined, like, oh, this is dangerous and nobody's using it, and we've been watching now for a few days or a few weeks, you can feel comfortable going ahead and blocking it. And so it's basically a manual process. At this point, I mean, it's fairly easy manual. I mean, it's got a nice, easy to use interface. Even I could do this. But we're also building a feature that will kind of do that analysis and that blocking automatically for you, which will be out in a few months. And that'll give people, we call it one-click protect at the moment, but that'll give people the ability to basically, use a wizard to do this and kind of speed the whole process up and just kind of point one-click protect at an application, give it the amount of time you want it to monitor it, to see what's being used and what's not being used, and then to implement the blocking on, anything that's not being used or anything that's, very dangerous, And the fallback position is if you're using something and that is dangerous, I mean, obviously, eventually you want to patch that and update it. However, you can still turn runtime monitoring on, leave that on, and then set alerts, So if you have an IR team or an MSSP that you're working with, or just, or a SOC that's running 24/7 for your company, you can link that runtime monitoring into that process, right? And so if somebody uses that method or that library that's vulnerable, you can look at the usage and who's using it and how they're using it and determine, have a better idea of whether or not that might have been a dangerous or, or an attack. Is that an accurate description, Julius?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Here I've just got the log4j one. It's just that one little method, the JNDI lookup. And what's nice about it, right, is that the vast majority of systems would never use that. Like you're only like crazy people would ever use that in the normal course of their systems, right? So if this JNDI lookup starts, triggering, that's a bad sign. And the Log4j team, they ripped it completely out. This method does not exist anymore in Log4j. I mean, that gives you a sense of how important it is.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's a great story. Yeah, I mean, the real point is like Jim said, I think that was a great point. Back in the early days of Java, why not include every library available? Back then there was maybe 1,000 or 100 libraries, and
oh yeah,
you saw the stat that I showed from 2009. There was 46,000 repositories on GitHub, and now there's 28 million. I mean, obviously nowadays you're not going to include everything, otherwise you need to ship disks, right? But people still, just by the nature of the old way of thinking 20 plus years ago, when application security was not really even a term yet, people just included everything for the convenience of it.
No, and they still do. They still do. I don't see a lot of careful shrinking and curation of what libraries you're including in your systems myself. I see a lot of developers, they're just focused on like, let's get this working. Let's achieve the use cases that we've committed to. Let's get these points, our agile sprint points done, on our 2-week sprints, right? Like they really just want to get things working. They don't want to keep things really neat and clean and minimal.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of think of it like you're racing a car. Like if you're taking a road trip, you want to bring everything you can with you. So you
just in case, right?
Taking your car anyways, might as well use the space. But if you're racing around a track in circles all day, you don't want all that extra weight in your race car, right? Because it's just going to slow you down. And performance and security are very tightly woven. And when you actually ship an application into production, you really don't want to send anything in there that isn't needed to get the job done, right? And that's the same thing from attack surface point of view. And when you see these, that was an incredible demo you showed when all those unloaded libraries that were never ever even used, and it's just gobs and gobs of attack surface. As an application security hacker, I mean, they must just drool when they come upon an application that's just got like 50 unused libraries waiting to, for them to find the next 0 day on.
Yeah, we did a peer-reviewed reproducible study on that. Like how many libraries are there in systems and what percentage is coming from the core team? Maybe
I'm curious, like what would your guess be? Just given that you've been in this for over 5 years now, deep.
Yeah, my guess was
be of any normal application that's shipped, how many of all the methods in all the libraries are actually used? Like what percentage? Would you say 10%, 20%?
Well, you're asking me, right? And
yeah,
so
I'm just telling you, this is your experience. What would your guess be?
My guess would be less than 0.1%.
Wow. No, my guess would have been as a safe marketing claim, reduce your attack surface by over 50%. But you're saying
Oh no,
over
99
90%,
over 99, over 99,
over 99%, you can reduce your attack surface with runtime protection. Wow. Okay, so we got to do some more research on this. But we are at the bottom of the hour here. Thank you guys so much. Unless there's any final, we can stay a few minutes extra if there's any final questions that popped in anybody's head.
But we won't be hurt if anyone leaves early. Not early.
No, yeah.
At the actual time.
Unless someone's speaking up, I'm going to call it right here at 10:30 and respect everyone's time. And hope you join us in 2 weeks. We're going to be doing the WAF. What's the WAF versus runtime protection? And I've been doing a little research on WAFs lately, and I didn't realize they caught on so much. There's tens of thousands of people out there that are WAF engineers, because WAFs are so complex, and you really need to babysit them. And runtime protection is pretty simple, as you can see. So it should be an interesting session. Hope to see you guys again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, thanks for
so
coming.
much, guys.
Thank you, Al. Thanks, Julius. All right. Take care.